Hi, and welcome to OTH Sports View. It's actually our first broadcast of the new year and a significant time for college basketball fans, with both teams, St. Bonaventure-wise, heading into a key part of their season. On my right, JP Butler, in his 8th year covering the Bonnies, and Mark Schmidt has been there 9 years, so he's been there through most of the time. Bonnies off to a really good start percentage-wise in their non-conference circumstance. Meanwhile, on my left, first-year reporter Jeff Madigan kind of stepped into a great situation, 11-2 start for the Bonner women, and we'll talk about the men first with JP. JP, when Mark Schmidt talks about the non-conference portion of the schedule, he's very quick to say, "Oh, I wish we were 11-0." But clearly, you're not going to go to Syracuse and win. Bonner's 8-3, had the 6-point loss to Hofstra here, the loss at Siena by 3 points. 8-3 percentage-wise, the best he's done. What did you see out of the Bonnies over the first 11 games?
I mean, I think they're about right where I would have expected them to be. I think where probably a lot of people expected them to be. This was a non-conference schedule, I think, that was certainly challenging in a lot of ways, but also set up for the possibility for a lot of wins. And so I thought they would be in that 8-3, 9-2 range. Going into this last stretch here, they had a couple of opportunities to win some games in a row going into conference play, and I thought there was a chance they could get all of them. The one that they didn't get was that Siena game out there, which was a tough game, and Siena has turned into a pretty difficult opponent for them. Siena's won 3 games in a row in that series. But overall, I think about where you would think, some pretty, as Schmidt said, they've looked pretty good at times. They've looked, not so great at times. They've played, some pretty good basketball against some decent, middling, mid-major teams in Ohio and UB and Vermont and some of those teams. And they've also, looked, they've got some things that they certainly have to work on before they go into conference play, because we know now that it's only going to get tougher. And what I wonder now is what we've seen in this 11-game stretch. How much of this is going to translate? The things they're doing well, the things they need to still work on defensively, shooting the ball at times. How much of this is going to translate against some of these conference teams that they're about to see now, and are they going to be able to do some of these same things and get better at some of these things against better competition moving forward? They've done a pretty good job to this point, 8-3. The only really better non-conference here, in my opinion, was 2 years ago. They won 10 games when they were still playing, or 9 games, I think it was, when they were still playing a 13-game conference schedule. 9-4, that's pretty good. And now, this year, better winning percentage. Now, how much of that can they take into conference play? And it starts on Saturday night against a Davidson team that's, going to be pretty good, going to be one of the better teams in the A-10 this year.
One of the things that a coach will tell you, especially when they get to this point, those first 11 games were just preparation for the time that this is really important. It's the conference time. As you mentioned, it starts against the defending champion Davidson on Saturday night. But what's interesting to me is that historically, the Bonaventure teams, when it relates to the preseason predictions of the Atlantic 10, tend to be rated low. This year, the Bonnies get an 8th place prediction. Do you think maybe they're better than that?
I think it's going to be, it's funny because every year you go in thinking, they're probably going to be better than where they were picked. Except this year, they're kind of given that respect right out of the gate. And it was interesting because at the time they were, they had obviously lost some guys from last year, namely Yusu Endoy. They had some guys hurt. They were, smaller in numbers. They were smaller in size. And yet this happened to be the year that they were picked higher than, really most others under Schmidt. And I think that certainly spoke to having the likes of Marcus Posley and Deion Wright and Jalen Adams back. Given all the circumstances, they could still be a pretty good team with these guys. And so they were given that respect. And now I'm thinking, well, it probably will be right in that range this year. I think right now there are 6 teams that have certainly separated themselves in some ways as being the best 6 teams in the A-10, And for a while there, all 6 of them were kind of getting off to NCAA tournament type of year. We'll see how many continue that, but that was Davidson, Dayton, Richmond, George Washington, who's ranked right now, VCU, and I don't know which one I missed right there, but those were the teams that really set themselves apart. It's going to be difficult to catch those 6.
Right.
I think that's certainly their goal, maybe to try to challenge, to see if they can challenge those teams. And then after that, it's certainly open. And so I think certainly there's a chance for this team to finish, to shoot for top 7. I think, after that point, you've got St. Joe's, who might be in that boat, who's a little bit better this year, and now they have DeAndre Bembry as a junior. I think Bonna could certainly be in that mix. But it'll also be interesting, too, because the bottom of the league is a little bit better than I thought it would have been this year. Before you look at some of those games and you think, those are guaranteed wins. That's how they get a lot of their wins, in conference. But, now it sounds like Duquesne is better. Fordham was 9-2 at one point, which we never see out of a Fordham team. UMass was a lot better than I thought they were going to be this year. So those games become a little bit tougher. But, I think having said all that, there's certainly the possibility for them to be sort of where they were last year. I think challenged for sort of what they did last year. Last year they were 10-8, winning record, which we know they'll take any time in the Atlantic 10. That's hard to come by. I don't know if they'll get quite to that point. I think it's possible. I think 500-ish is certainly possible, and then you'd be talking about another 17-ish winning season. That's where I think that they'll be in the end.
We'll find out about that starting on Saturday night. Next up, we'll talk to Jeff Madigan about the women's program. Jeff, it was a good time for you to take over this beat. The Bonna women opened with a win, 2 losses then in the WNIT. Since then, 10 straight wins. They've looked awfully good, really, as we're about to head into the Atlantic 10 season. What did you take from the first 13 games that you saw?
Well, their defense is definitely starting to come together. I mean, last 2 games they only allowed 47 points to their opponents, and some nights, like the other night against Canisius, their offense isn't at full click. But when your defense is playing well, defense wins games. So far, their defense is playing well, and that's why they're 11-2 right now.
I talked to JP about this as it relates to the men. Absolutely true of the women as well. Historically, preseason predictions in the Atlantic 10, Bonna gets underrated or seems to be underrated.
Usually.
This year, Bonna women picked 9.
Yep.
Do you think they could finish higher?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I hope they do, and I believe they will. Now, the same thing happened last year where they had a really good non-conference schedule. They beat some good teams, Penn State, among them, in Georgetown, those teams. But then it came apart in conference season, and they actually won their first conference game and finished 5-11 in conference. So you want to look at it that way. They were 4-11 in their last 15 conference games last season. Now, could that happen again? It absolutely could. But you just get the feeling that this year's team is different. The way they've played their game so far, the way they've defended their home court so far, just the things that they're doing together as a team, passing the ball better, shooting the ball better. Those things that are just getting this team to where they are right now, and you think that those things will continue starting this Sunday at Rhode Island.
You and I were at the Canisius game earlier this week, and afterwards, Terry Zay, who's a former Bonna assistant, was talking about this team, and certainly you'd agree, this is a team for basketball purists. If you like a lot of scoring and a lot of glitz, you're not going to get, this team grinds.
Yep.
And really, this team is greater than the sum of its parts. But in a way, given Bonna's size and its position in the Atlantic 10, it's kind of a rewarding way to watch basketball.
It is. It is. And they think they were picked to finish 9th, and I hope they finish better than that. The year they went to the NCAA tournament and won their division league, they were picked to finish 6th. So they really don't take into account these preseason rankings. And I know Coach Crowley and the girls don't care where they're picked. They don't care what other people think about them. They're just going to go out and play their style of basketball and do what they want to do what they need to do to win games.
One of the things that we can't miss about what's happening so far is Katie Healy.
Right.
Her body of work has been absolutely fantastic. And I know you asked the question of her after the game about, she's putting herself in the top 10 or 15.
Yeah.
And Jim Crowley corrected you, said, no, she's higher than that.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking she's probably going to be at career's end in the top 5 or 7, but she's really matured and is playing awfully well at the perfect time.
Absolutely is. And, she missed 2 games earlier this year, so we don't know where she'd be if she played those 2 games. Now, obviously, the record would still be the same because they won those 2 games, you'd assume. But she's first all-time in blocks. She's third all-time in rebounds. She just passed Dana Mitchell, who is probably the best player to ever play for this program. She got her number in the rafters in the rebounds list, and she's 8th in scoring, and she's continuing to move up that list. And when she's done, she'll probably be top 3 or 4. I don't think she'll quite get to 2,000, but, she's becoming one of the best. I said top 10 or 15, and it's probably top 5 or 10, maybe even 5 or 7, to be honest with you. It's amazing what she's doing this year, and it just seems like she's doing it so quietly. It's like she's not putting up gaudy statistics or anything like that, but she's just consistent every night.
Bonna, as I mentioned, was picked to finish 9th in the preseason poll. I don't totally have a feel for what the AT&T is going to be like this year. What's your perception of the entire league as we get in?
Right now, Duquesne is on top. I want to say they're 12-1, something along those lines. They're really good, and Bonna will play them twice. Once down in Pittsburgh, and once here actually will be the season finale. So that's a game there that could be a lot of playoff implications, and Duquesne might be fighting for the number 1 seed. At that point, Dayton's always good. George Washington has some of the best players in the league. VCU has come on really strong this year. St. Louis is up there, and then the Bonnas are, they're probably right there in those top 5 or 6 teams, and there's some teams below them. Fordham, LaSalle among those teams. Rhode Island, a team that they'll play Sunday, they're struggling a little bit, but anything can happen in A-10 play. Once Saturday rolls around and the first set of Atlantic 10 games come, everybody's 0-0, and you have 16 games to prove yourself.
Bonna's season starts on Sunday, as Jeff said, at Rhode Island. We'll see how this season unfolds, and we'll be back next week with another edition of OTH Sports View.